Nurse saved a man's life after losing her job. 5 hours later, 10 luxury cars appeared at her home. Emily Carter had never seen it coming. For almost 10 years, she had walked the bright corridors of Oakwood Regional Medical Center in Nashville, Tennessee with steady confidence. Her mornings began at 6 o'clock, her dark hair tied back neatly, her scrubs freshly pressed, and her ID badge clipped to her chest like armor. Emily wasn't just a nurse. She was the steady hand in a crisis, the calm voice in the chaos, the one families clung to in moments of despair. She had held newborns, closed the eyes of the dying, and spent countless nights trading sleep for compassion. It was her purpose, her lifeline, until it wasn't. The announcement came on a rainy Thursday morning. Gray clouds hung low over Nashville. The parking lot was slick with drizzle, and the hospital lobby smelled faintly of antiseptic and wet umbrellas. The memo, cold and clinical, came from Human Resources. The hospital, now under the wing of a larger healthcare conglomerate, was undergoing a structural reorganization. That meant budget cuts. That meant layoffs. That meant people like Emily, people with tenure but not political leverage, were suddenly expendable. She sat across from the director of nursing, her stomach tight, barely hearing the scripted apologies. Her record was spotless, her patient reviews stellar, but the department needed to shift resources, and unfortunately her role had been deemed non-essential. Non-essential. The word echoed as she packed up her locker, hands trembling, heart heavy. She thought of her daughter, Lily, only 6 years old, who had left a crayon drawing in Emily's lunchbox that morning. It showed their house with hearts floating above it, and the words, "My mommy is a hero," scrawled in pink marker. Emily pressed the drawing to her chest and felt her throat tighten. By noon, she was out of a job. The walk to her car felt surreal, as if the world had tilted slightly, and she was now walking through a version of her life that didn't quite fit. Her Honda Civic, old but reliable, waited under a dripping elm tree. As she sat behind the wheel, the silence wrapped around her like fog. She didn't cry. Not yet. There would be time for that later. The drive home took 40 minutes, though. It felt like 5. Every red light gave her too much time to think. How long would her savings last? What if she couldn't find another job soon? How would she tell Lily? The thought of looking into her daughter's bright, trusting eyes and explaining that everything had changed, that her mother's steady world had just crumbled, made her stomach twist. Their small apartment in East Nashville was still quiet. When she arrived, she had a few hours before Lily came home from school. Emily changed out of her scrubs for the last time and stood in the kitchen, staring at the calendar pinned to the wall. Rent was due in 2 weeks. Groceries were running low, and there was no safety net. She picked up her phone, hesitated, then called her sister in Atlanta. The call went to voicemail. Emily left a message, vague, upbeat, pretending it wasn't a big deal. She didn't want to worry anyone. She didn't want to admit, even to herself, how scared she was. By 3 o'clock, she found herself walking aimlessly through the neighborhood. The air smelled of damp earth and spring blossoms. Birds chirped as if the world hadn't just shifted beneath her feet. She passed a group of kids playing basketball, the thump of the ball rhythmic and distant, like a heartbeat she no longer trusted. She stopped at a small cafe on the corner, somewhere she had only visited once before, and stepped inside. The warm scent of coffee and cinnamon filled the air. She ordered a latte, even though she probably shouldn't spend the money, and sat near the window watching people move through their normal lives. For a few minutes, she just breathed. No patients, no alarms, no fluorescent lights or sterile gloves. Just silence and coffee, and the fragile illusion that things would somehow be okay. She stayed there longer than she planned, lost in the rhythm of the street outside. When the barista began sweeping the floor near her table, she took the hint and stood to leave. Outside, the late afternoon sun had broken through the clouds, casting golden light across the sidewalk. Emily took one step out the door and froze. Across the street, a man staggered, clutching his chest, his face contorted in pain. Then suddenly, he collapsed. Without thinking, her training kicked in. She dropped her coffee, dashed across the road, and knelt beside him. His lips were blue. No pulse. People stood frozen, unsure of what to do. But Emily didn't hesitate. She tilted his head, checked his airway, and began chest compressions. "Call 911, she shouted. The crowd watched, silent and wide-eyed, as she fought to bring the stranger back from the brink. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, this single instinctive act of compassion, was about to rewrite the entire course of her life. Emily didn't have time to think, only to act. The world around her narrowed to the man on the pavement and the sound of his breath, or rather the terrifying absence of it. He lay sprawled across the sidewalk in front of a boutique clothing store, one shoe off, his fingers curled awkwardly, his mouth slightly open. She dropped to her knees, the rough concrete biting into her skin, and immediately checked his pulse. Again, still nothing. She tilted his head back gently, opened his airway, and began compressions. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Her body moved with the rhythm etched into her muscle memory after years of training and drills. Except now it wasn't a simulation. This wasn't a test with plastic dummies and blinking classroom projectors. This was life or death. His chest, pressed down beneath her locked hands, his ribs creaking slightly under the force. She counted silently, lips pressed in determination, refusing to let adrenaline shake her focus. Around her, people were frozen, some filming, others whispering, but no one moved to help. "Has someone called 911? She called out, again breathless between compressions. A voice answered. A young man with a phone to his ear nodded frantically. "They're on their way." Emily kept going, 30 compressions, 2 breaths. She leaned in, sealed his mouth, gave the rescue breaths with precision, then resumed compressions without pause. The seconds felt endless. Her arms burned, sweat gathered at her brow. She didn't dare stop to wipe it. The man's face, pale and slick with sweat, offered no clues about who he was or how this had happened. His expensive watch caught a ray of sunlight, glinting gold for just a moment. It meant nothing to her. He was a patient now, a life to be saved. The sirens arrived faintly at first, then louder. A red and white ambulance turned the corner, tires screeching slightly as it stopped. Paramedics jumped out, fast and practiced. A whirlwind of motion and clipped instructions. Emily didn't stop until they physically tapped her shoulder and took over. She stood up slowly, her hands numb, her knees shaking. The crowd parted around her like a curtain, murmurs breaking. The silence that had fallen over the block. Someone offered her a bottle of water, which she accepted with a nod but didn't drink. Her eyes were fixed on the paramedics as they hooked the man to a portable defibrillator and administered shocks. One, then another. His body jolted slightly. The monitor beeped. After a tense pause, a faint pulse returned. The team worked quickly, lifting him onto a stretcher, strapping him in, securing IVs and oxygen. "Are you the one who started CPR?" one of the paramedics asked, his tone both curious and respectful. Emily nodded, still catching her breath. "Compressions until you arrived." "Yes, he collapsed right there. No pulse. I did." "You probably saved his life," the paramedic said. "Good job." She didn't know what to say. Her hands were still trembling. As the ambulance doors closed and the sirens flared back to life, she watched it disappear down the street, carrying away a man she didn't know. His name, his story, his family, all mysteries. The moment was over as suddenly as it had begun. The crowd dispersed. A few people approached her to say thank you. Others asked what had happened, and more than one person asked if she was a nurse. She answered vaguely, "I used to be." It was still too fresh to say the rest. She walked back to her car in a haze, the coffee cup still lying on the sidewalk where she had dropped it, its contents bleeding into the gutter. She stepped over it and kept walking. The adrenaline was wearing off now, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that made her legs heavy and her thoughts scattered. By the time she got home, the sun was beginning to set. The soft orange light filled her small kitchen as she washed her hands methodically at the sink, scrubbing longer than necessary. She sat at the table, opened her laptop, and instinctively typed cardiac arrest survival rates. She knew them already, had memorized them years ago, but somehow seeing them again grounded her. She had done everything right. Still, her thoughts spiraled. Had she been fast enough? Was there something she had missed? Would he be okay? There was no closure, no name, no way to check in. She hadn't even had time to ask anyone who he was. Lily came home not long after, her backpack dragging behind her, face lit up from a day of second-grade triumphs. Emily smiled and listened as her daughter recounted a spelling test and a new song learned in music class. She made grilled cheese for dinner, though her stomach could barely handle a few bites. The weight of the day hung over her, heavy and inescapable. Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep clutching her stuffed rabbit, Emily sat on the couch, the television flickering quietly in the background. A reporter talked about local crime statistics, then a piece about the mayor's upcoming speech. No mention of the man she had saved, no headlines, no gratitude. And still, she didn't even know his name. She turned off the television and stared at the dark screen, her reflection faintly visible. That man had almost died, and she had brought him back. She should have felt powerful, triumphant. Instead, she felt invisible, unemployed, alone. A former nurse with no hospital, no paycheck, and no answers. And yet, deep down, she knew something had shifted. Not in the world, not yet, but in her. Something vital had awakened in the space between each compression and breath. Something that refused to let go, that pulsed inside her like a reminder. She had lost her job, but not her calling. And the story of what had just happened on that quiet sidewalk in Nashville was far from over. Morning came quietly, as it always did in their small apartment, with the light creeping in through the blinds and casting soft lines across the hardwood floor. Emily rose early, her body still sore from the previous day. The events replayed, in her mind like a muted reel, frame by frame. The collapse, the crowd, the compressions, the arrival of the ambulance. The man's face, pale and unfamiliar, still lingered in her thoughts. She didn't know who he was, but something about the moment had carved itself into her, permanent and raw. She made Lily breakfast, braided her hair and walked her to the bus stop with practiced ease. But her mind wasn't fully there. Her eyes kept drifting to the sky, the sidewalk, the passing cars. Everything around her seemed slightly off-kilter, as if the world had taken one small step to the left, and nothing lined up quite the same anymore. When she returned home, she sat at the kitchen table, opened her laptop and typed a simple query into the search bar. Man collapses in Nashville, saved by bystander. Nothing. She tried again, reworded it. Still nothing. No news report, no social media post, no acknowledgement of what had happened. It was as if the man had disappeared into thin air, as if she had dreamed the entire incident. A part of her wanted to let it go. After all, she had done what she was trained to do. She had acted in a moment of need, but another part of her needed to know. Had he survived? Was he with his family now, recovering in a hospital bed? Or had something gone wrong after she stepped back and the ambulance doors closed? Her phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up, half hoping it might be someone calling about a job application she had submitted weeks earlier. But it was only a message from a friend, checking in casually. Emily considered replying, then set the phone down without typing a word. By noon, she found herself walking the same route she had taken the day before, retracing her steps from the cafe to the sidewalk where the man had fallen. The boutique store was open, and the street was quiet. No trace remained of the life or death struggle that had played out in full view of half a dozen onlookers. She stood there for a long time, hands in her pockets, watching the traffic roll by. The woman who ran the boutique stepped outside to shake a small rug. "Hey," she said, recognizing Emily. "You were the nurse, weren't you?" Emily nodded slowly. "I guess I still am," the woman smiled. "You saved him, that was incredible. I've never seen anything like it." "Do you know who he was?" Emily asked, her voice low, hesitant. The woman shook her head. "No idea. He was dressed nice, though, expensive shoes, fancy watch, maybe a businessman passing through." Emily thanked her and moved on. A businessman. That much she had guessed. But there were thousands of those in Nashville every week. Without a name or a face in the news, he might as well have been a ghost. She returned home more frustrated than before. Her instincts told her that there was something unusual about the silence. In cases like this, especially when there were witnesses and someone was saved dramatically in public, local news usually picked it up. A human interest story, a quick segment on the evening broadcast. But there had been nothing. It was the kind of silence that felt curated, deliberate, as if someone had erased the moment before it could ripple out into the world. That night, she dreamed of hospitals, white lights and endless corridors, gurneys wheeling by, alarms blaring. In the dream, she kept turning corners, searching room after room for the man she had saved, but every time she opened a door, the bed was empty. The next day passed slowly. Still no job offers. Still no word about the man. She spent the afternoon on her laptop, revising her resume again, applying for anything remotely related to her skill set, clinic positions, private caregiving roles, even a temporary travel nurse post in Kentucky that would mean leaving Lily with her sister for weeks at a time. The thought of that made her stomach churn, but she was running out of options. Her savings account balance was shrinking by the day, and she had already skipped her own cell phone payment to make sure Lily had everything she needed. It was nearly dusk when there was a knock at the door. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her landlord usually texted before showing up, and her neighbors rarely visited unannounced. She hesitated, then walked to the door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. She opened the door slowly, stepped out onto the porch, and glanced around. The street was empty. The air was cool and smelled faintly of honeysuckle. On the doormat sat a small envelope. No name, no return address. Just her apartment number written in precise, slanted handwriting. She picked it up, her heart rate quickening. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. A single sentence was typed on it. "You saved a man who was never supposed to be saved." No signature. Nothing else. Emily stood there for a long time, the note in her hand, her breath caught in her chest. The weight of the words sank in slowly, chilling and strange. What did it mean? Who had left it? How did they know where she lived? The note was too specific to be a coincidence, too cryptic to be ignored. She stepped back inside and locked the door behind her, drawing the curtains as she moved through the apartment. Her instincts, usually calm and rational, were suddenly on high alert. She double-checked the locks, made sure Lily's window was secured, and sat down at the kitchen table again, the note lying in front of her like a puzzle with half the pieces missing. The man she had saved wasn't just another passerby. That much was clear now. Someone knew about her. Someone was watching. And this was only the beginning. Sleep came in fragments. Emily lay awake long after the lights were out, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, ears straining for every sound outside her apartment. The soft creak of wood in the hallway, the hum of the refrigerator, even the occasional drip of water in the bathroom sink became sources of suspicion. The note from the night before lay on her kitchen table, as if watching her from a distance. "You saved a man who was never supposed to be saved." She had read it a dozen times already, trying to make sense of it, trying to convince herself it meant nothing. But it meant something. It had to. By morning, her exhaustion felt heavier than usual, but she pushed through it. She helped Lily get ready for school, prepared breakfast, and pretended nothing had changed. The act of keeping the morning routine steady was like clinging to a life raft in a sea of unknowns. Once Lily was safely on the school bus, Emily stood in the doorway watching it disappear down the street, a sense of isolation settling in her chest. She returned inside and locked the door. The envelope and the note still sat on the kitchen table. She stared at them as she dialed the local police department. Her voice trembled slightly as she explained what had happened, her involvement in saving a stranger, the note that appeared on her doorstep, the unnerving silence since. The officer she spoke with was polite, but non-committal. There was no threat. In the message, no crime to investigate, just a vague warning without evidence or suspect. They filed a report, told her to stay alert, and ended the call with a hollow reassurance. It offered no comfort. Emily sat in the quiet for a long time afterward, her thoughts spinning in circles. She felt like a thread had been pulled loose from the fabric of her life, and now everything was unraveling. She tried to go about her day, but her focus was fractured. She refreshed her email inbox repeatedly, hoping for updates on the dozens of job applications she had submitted. Nothing new. The silence was beginning to sound like rejection. Even her former co-workers had stopped responding to her messages. She was vanishing from a life she had spent years building. By the afternoon, restlessness took over. She left the apartment and walked back to the area where everything had happened. The cafe, the boutique, the exact patch of sidewalk where the man had collapsed. It all looked so ordinary. But to her, it was a charged space now, a place that had rewritten the direction of her life. She lingered near the boutique, where a woman sweeping the doorway recognized her. "You're the nurse, right?" the woman said. "The one who saved that guy." "I used to be," Emily replied, her voice low. "Whatever you are now, you did something amazing. That man was lucky." Emily hesitated. "Do you know who he was?" The woman shook her head. "No clue." "He looked important, though. You know, suit, watch, nice shoes, probably someone passing through." She thanked the woman and continued walking, but her thoughts were heavier than ever. Someone had known exactly who he was. Someone had deliberately kept it quiet. And someone had left a message at her door that suggested he should not have survived. That kind of silence wasn't ordinary. It was constructed. Later that evening, she received a call from her old hospital. Her heart jumped, hoping it was news of reinstatement or at least recognition. But the voice on the other end was a new nurse who needed help locating digital records from a patient file Emily had once handled. It was a short, cold conversation. When it ended, Emily stared at the wall for minutes. It wasn't just a job she had lost. It was identity, purpose, and connection, all of it slipping further out of reach. She tried to distract herself by researching volunteer opportunities. Maybe she couldn't find paid work, but she could still be useful, still be a nurse. She visited a couple of community clinics, hoping to offer her time. One had a waiting list for volunteers. Another said they'd keep her resume on file. It was another dead end, another door not fully closed but not open either. The sun was beginning to set as she walked home. She paused at the same spot where the man had fallen, her mind replaying the scene like it was burned into her memory. The crowd, the compressions, the paramedics, everything had moved so fast, and yet it lingered with relentless weight. She almost crossed the street to the nearby police station to ask if they had a report, anything about the man's identity or condition, but something inside her told her to stop. A whisper of warning, subtle but firm. The deeper she dug, the more entangled she would become. Back at home, Emily started dinner, trying to focus on the mundane. She boiled water, sliced vegetables, and let her hands move on instinct. That's when she heard it. Engines. Not the regular growl of cars pulling into a driveway or teenagers racing down the block. These were synchronized, deep-toned, unmistakably powerful. They grew louder as they approached, rolling down her street, like a mechanical procession. She moved to the window just in time to see the first of them come into view. Luxury cars, multiple, black, sleek, with darkened windows and perfect alignment. They turned the corner and slowly pulled up outside her apartment building. One by one, they parked with exact precision. 10 in total. Her street had never seen anything like it. Neighbors came outside murmuring, recording with their phones. The entire block paused to witness the arrival of someone extraordinary. Emily's heart pounded. She backed away from the window and stood in the center of her apartment. Then came the knock. She didn't open the door immediately. She called her neighbor, someone she trusted, and asked her to keep an eye out. Then, she walked to the door slowly and looked through the peephole. No one. Still, she opened it cautiously and stepped outside. The sidewalk was quiet. The cars stood like sentinels, unmoving, doors closed. But at her feet was another box, sleek, black, tied with a crimson ribbon, next to it an envelope. Her name, handwritten. She brought them inside, locked the door, and placed them on the table next to the first note. This envelope contained a single card, the same handwriting. The truth is coming. Do not be afraid of what follows. Inside the box, a small golden pendant shaped like a heart. On the back, a single engraved letter. Emily had no idea who Jay was. The mystery deepened, and with it her fear. But beneath that fear was something else, an understanding that this was no longer about the past few days. This was about something much bigger, something that had been set in motion the moment she chose to act on that sidewalk. Someone out there knew her, and they were watching. The air felt unusually still that afternoon, heavy with a tension that Emily couldn't name. She had spent the day inside, barely touching her to-do list, her thoughts scattered and distracted by the strange sequence of events now shaping her life, the mysterious note, the anonymous gift, the silence from the authorities. Everything weighed on her like fog. She kept returning to the pendant, tracing the delicate letter J with her fingertip, trying to remember if she knew anyone with that initial who would do something so cryptic. But each possibility dissolved quickly, replaced by more questions. It was just past 5 o'clock in the afternoon when she heard them. Not footsteps, not chatter. Engines, multiple, low, powerful and coordinated. At first it sounded like distant thunder rolling over the quiet residential streets. Then the volume swelled, and the distinct sound of high-performance engines grew unmistakable. Emily rushed to the window and moved the curtain just enough to peer outside. What she saw made her breath catch. Sleek black vehicles, identical, in model, make and color, turned onto her street in a perfect line. They moved slowly, gracefully, with an eerie synchronization that was almost military in its precision. 1, 2, 3, then more. She counted 10 in total, each one with tinted windows and gleaming exteriors. They parked along the sidewalk in front of her building, forming a solid wall of luxury and mystery. The sight stunned her. Nothing in her neighborhood had ever drawn this kind of attention. It was a modest, quiet part of East Nashville, where old sedans and family vans lined the streets, not exotic sports cars or high-end executive sedans. Within seconds, neighbors emerged. From their houses, some stood in driveways, others stepped onto porches, a few pulled out their phones already filming. Even the children playing nearby stopped and stared. It was impossible not to. Emily stood frozen at the window, heart racing. She had no idea what to do. Her phone buzzed on the table, a message from her upstairs neighbor, asking if she knew what was going on. She ignored it. Her eyes stayed on the street, locked on the line of cars as their engines faded into silence. For a full minute, nothing happened. Then one door opened, the third car from the front. From it stepped a woman who seemed impossibly poised for the surreal scene unfolding around her. She was tall, dressed in a sharply tailored navy blue suit, and wore heels that clicked softly on the pavement as she walked. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek chignon, and she carried a slim leather portfolio in one hand. Her movements were deliberate, composed, as if she were immune to the curiosity swelling around her. Emily watched, unable to move, as the woman approached her building. She didn't speak to anyone. She didn't glance at the crowd. Her eyes were fixed forward, her destination clear. A knock came at the door. Emily hesitated only for a second, then moved slowly, cautiously. She checked the peephole. The woman waited calmly, a faint smile on her face. Emily opened the door halfway. "Yes? Miss Emily Carter?" the woman asked, voice smooth, neutral, professional. "Yes. My name is Victoria Hale. I represent Mr. James Ellington. He asked me to come personally. He would like to meet you." Emily blinked, the name hitting her like a stone to the chest. James Ellington, the billionaire, the founder of Ellington Global Systems, a man whose name was constantly in tech headlines, business magazines, and philanthropy circles. She had never seen him in person, never imagined a connection to such a figure. Yet his name was now falling into her life like a puzzle piece she didn't know where to place. Victoria continued, "Mr. Ellington was the man you saved on the sidewalk 2 days ago. He was in Nashville for a confidential meeting and had requested no visible security for discretion. That's why the incident never made the news, but he owes you his life and he would like to thank you directly." Emily struggled to respond. He's okay. He is alive because of you, and recovering well. He insisted that we locate you immediately. He would like to speak with you today, if possible. Victoria extended an envelope. "Already?" Transportation has been arranged. We can leave whenever you." Emily glanced past her to the row of black vehicles. Her mind raced. It was too much, too surreal, but it was happening. She was standing in the doorway of her modest apartment, wearing jeans and an old sweatshirt, being summoned to meet one of the most powerful men in the country. "I have a daughter. We are aware. Arrangements can be made. Mr. Ellington wishes to ensure that this meeting does not disrupt your life in any way. In fact, he was quite insistent that you be treated with the respect your actions deserve." There was a pause, a breath. Emily stepped back inside briefly, called her neighbor, and explained the situation in the simplest terms possible. The neighbor, though clearly skeptical, agreed to watch Lily once she returned from school. Emily changed into something slightly more formal, still simple but presentable, and returned to the doorway. "I'm ready," she said. Victoria nodded once, then stepped aside and motioned to the waiting vehicle. One of the rear doors opened automatically as Emily approached. She climbed in slowly, taking a final look at the street, now filled with murmuring onlookers, cameras recording, and neighbors whispering. The door shut with a soft click. Moments later, the procession of cars pulled away from the curb and began to move, leaving behind the stunned street and taking Emily deeper into a world she had never imagined stepping into. The further they drove, the more surreal it all became. Something had shifted permanently. This was no longer about saving a life. It was about entering a story where her role was no longer just a bystander. She had become the center. The ride was silent, but the air inside the car felt charged. Emily sat upright, her hands resting on her lap, her mind an avalanche of questions. She didn't dare ask aloud. The interior of the vehicle exuded refined minimalism, subtle stitching on the leather seats, ambient lighting that softly outlined the contours of the doors, and the faintest scent of sandalwood lingering in the air. She had never been inside anything like it. Victoria, seated across from her, remained composed, glancing at her tablet occasionally, never breaking the stillness with unnecessary words. It was not a ride through the city. It felt like a transition between two versions of reality. The scenery beyond the tinted windows passed in vague impressions, urban sprawl fading into the manicured order of private roads and wooded lots. When the car finally slowed, it was clear they had left Nashville's everyday world behind. The vehicle passed through a wrought iron gate flanked by polished stone columns. Beyond it, a long private drive stretched forward, lined with towering oak trees and garden hedges so precise they seemed almost unreal. The road curved gently upward until the mansion came into view. It was nothing like the overdone palaces one might expect from a billionaire. There was no gold, no flash. The building stood with an understated elegance, clean architectural lines, fused with traditional craftsmanship. Brick and stone, accented with wood beams and wide glass panels, formed a structure that seemed to breathe with the landscape rather than dominate it. It was a statement not of wealth, but of control, of precision, of intentionality. As the car came to a stop before the main entrance, a staff member opened the door and offered a courteous nod. Emily stepped out, her shoes touching the smooth stone path with a faint echo. She followed Victoria up the wide steps and through the front doors, which opened into a vast interior filled with natural light, polished floors, and the quiet hum of an unseen world functioning perfectly in the background. The foyer gave way to a large sitting area that overlooked a garden courtyard through expansive floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything inside the mansion was deliberate. Furniture arranged in a way that invited conversation, but kept distance. Art, pieces that balanced texture and light without demanding attention. Bookshelves filled but not crammed with titles whose spines spoke of history, science, and philosophy. Emily barely had time to take it in before Victoria gestured for her to sit on one of the leather chairs near the fireplace. "He'll be with you shortly," she said. Emily nodded, then sat down, her fingers brushing against the armrest as if grounding herself in something tangible. She wasn't used to silence like this. Hospitals were never quiet. Even at night, there were beeps, calls, the movement of life continuing on. Here, the stillness pressed inward. Minutes passed. Then, the door opened. He walked in without ceremony. James Ellington was taller than she had expected. Not towering, but he carried himself with a presence that filled the room without needing to assert it. His dark grey sweater and tailored trousers contrasted with the common perception of men. Like him, there were no visible symbols of status, no watch, no phone in hand, no entourage trailing behind. Just a man who had nearly died, now walking with calm intention toward the woman who had saved him. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice warm, unforced, unmistakably genuine. "Thank you for coming." Emily stood awkwardly and extended her hand. "I wasn't sure I had a choice." He smiled faintly as they shook hands. "You did. You always have. But I hoped you'd say yes." They sat opposite each other. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together, not as a billionaire speaking from a pedestal, but as someone trying to bridge a human distance. "I don't remember much after collapsing," he said. "One moment I was walking, thinking about a contract negotiation. The next, darkness. But I've been told you acted fast, without hesitation, without help." "I did what I've been trained to do," had she replied. "I was a nurse for almost 10 years. You still are," he said. "No job title changes that." She looked down, unsure how to respond. "I didn't want this to be formal," he continued. "There's no PR team here, no cameras, just you and me. I needed to see you because what you did, it changed me." Emily raised her eyes to meet his. "I've lived most of my life insulated," he said, "surrounded by systems and people whose job it is to make sure I don't face risk. But that day, none of them were there. I was alone. And you, a stranger with no obligation, chose to act." She nodded slowly, still processing the surrealism of hearing those words from a man whose name appeared daily in financial headlines. "I didn't save you because of who you are," she said softly. "I know," he replied. "That's what makes it so powerful." There was a pause. "I want to do something for you," he continued, "something that reflects the depth of what you gave me. I considered money, donations, sponsorships, but none of it felt right. Then I realized it's not about giving you something symbolic. It's about restoring something real." He reached to the side table and picked up a sleek key fob. He set it on the coffee table between them. "These are the keys to 10 vehicles," he said. "All now registered in your name. I'm not giving you luxury, I'm giving you leverage, freedom, options. Sell them, keep them, donate them. Whatever you choose, they're yours. No strings." Emily stared at the keys, her throat tightening. "I can't accept that," she whispered. "It's too much, it doesn't make sense." He leaned back slightly. "It does to me. I was given a second chance, now I'm giving you a first." She didn't respond immediately. She was still trying to hold the pieces of this moment together. Everything about it felt unreal, and yet there was a clarity in his eyes that made her believe every word. "I know it's overwhelming," he said, "but I'm not trying to buy your gratitude. I'm simply repaying a debt in the only way I can. You stepped in when no one else did. Now it's my turn." She looked down at the keys again, still unsure whether to reach for them. "Take your time," he added. "If you walk away and decide this isn't for you, that's fine. But at least consider that maybe, just maybe, the world wants to say thank you in a way that matches what you gave." The room was silent again, but this time the silence wasn't heavy. It was full of possibility. The decision to stay did not come easily, nor was it a spontaneous leap of trust. Emily sat there, her eyes fixed on the key fob James had placed between them, as the echo of his words lingered in the elegant, quiet room. He had spoken without arrogance or obligation, without trying to impress or manipulate. It was not just the wealth surrounding her that felt surreal. It was the authenticity in his voice, the visible absence of any transactional tone. And yet, her instincts remained cautious. Too much had happened, too quickly. Her life had unraveled in silence and now seemed to be rebuilding in whispers from someone else's world. She did not reach for the keys. Not yet. James didn't press her. He simply rose from his seat, walked to the wide glass wall overlooking the garden, and stood there for a while in silence. Emily followed him with her gaze. He looked like someone who had once lived on the edge of control and suddenly been reminded that control was an illusion. There was something sobering in his posture, not the stance of a man used to power, but of one who had stared into mortality and returned with a quieter strength. After a moment, he spoke without turning around. "I'm aware of how strange this must feel. You didn't wake up expecting to be brought to someone else's reality, and I didn't expect to be alive today, rethinking my entire approach to life." Emily stood slowly, walked toward the window, and stood a few feet away from him, unsure of what to say. "I've had enough money for a long time," he continued, "more than I ever needed. I've built things, broken others, and lost sight of what mattered more times than I care to admit. But you reminded me, without knowing me, without being part of any plan, that value is still found in the unscripted moments, that sometimes it's a stranger who changes everything." She looked out at the garden with him, the soft burble of a nearby fountain blending into the fading sounds of the evening wind. "I don't want to be a stranger anymore," he said quietly. "Who show up when it counts, not to myself, and not to the people." Emily turned to face him, finally finding the calm to speak without tension. "Why tell me all this?" He turned as well. "Because I want to offer you more than keys, more than money. I want to offer you a role. Not out of charity, but because you've proven you make decisions that save lives. I've been working on something and I want you to be part of it." She blinked, unsure what he meant. "There's a hospital I'm funding," he explained. "A new facility in a part of the state that's underserved. It's not about glossy hallways or nameplates on doors. It's about emergency response, trauma care, and frontline services, done differently, done better. And I need someone to run the emergency care division, not as a figurehead, as the leader." Emily was stunned. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. "I've read everything about your history at Oakwood. I've spoken with former patients, your colleagues. I know your evaluations, your disciplinary record, your mentorship hours. You've been overlooked for years by a system that values image more than heart. But I don't." He walked to the small bar near the side wall, poured himself a glass of water, and offered one to her. She accepted it, her hand shaking slightly. "I'm not offering this out of debt," he said. "You could walk out of here now, sell the cars, start fresh, and I'd never bother you again. But if part of you is still that nurse who ran into the street when everyone else stood frozen, then I'm asking you to bring that same courage into something bigger." Emily took a sip of water and sat down again, the weight of the offer settling over her like a second skin. She thought of Lily, of the eviction notice that had been tacked to their door 2 weeks ago, of the cold panic she'd felt when trying to decide between paying the utility bill or filling the fridge, of the quiet moments when she'd questioned her worth because the system had discarded her without ceremony. And now someone had seen her. Someone was giving her more than a second chance. He was giving her a platform. "Why me?" she asked again. "Because it matters who starts the foundation," James replied. "It matters what kind of soul drives it forward. You didn't act because of a badge or a paycheck. You acted because you couldn't not act. That's who I need." The conviction in his words was not aggressive. It was resolute, anchored in a belief she wasn't used to hearing about herself. Emily had spent years being passed over for promotions, told she was too empathetic or not assertive enough for leadership. Now she was being offered the reins of an entire medical wing. It defied logic, and yet it resonated. "I'd have to think about it," she said finally, not ready to commit but not ready to walk away either. "Of course," James said. "I'd expect nothing less." He reached into the side drawer of a nearby console and pulled out a thin folder, placing it gently in front of her on the coffee table. "There are no contracts yet," he said. "No timelines, just vision. Read it when you're ready." She looked at the folder, but didn't open it. "You're not a guest here," he said after a pause. "Happens next, you won't face it alone. You're the reason I'm still breathing." Whatever the sincerity in his voice silenced any doubts she might have voiced. She rose slowly, not from discomfort, but because the moment demanded stillness and care. He did not reach to shake her hand again. He simply nodded once, a gesture of mutual respect. Victoria returned a few minutes later to escort her back to the car. The ride home was even quieter than the journey there. This time, Emily stared out the window, not in disbelief, but in thought. Her life hadn't been transformed in a moment. It had shifted in layers, each one deeper than the last. When she arrived, Lily was already home, curled up on the couch watching her favorite cartoon, unaware of how different her mother's world had just become. Emily didn't say anything. Not yet. But as she walked to her room, she carried more than a folder and a fob. She carried the weight and possibility of becoming something more than forgotten. Morning came with a strange kind of clarity. Not peace, but a new awareness. Emily awoke before the sun rose, the world outside still shrouded in silence, and sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands. The folder James had given her rested on the table. She had read it the night before, every page, every line. There had been no corporate gloss, no legal jargon, just vision, clear, structured, purposeful. It described a new kind of emergency, wing focused on human-centered response, interdisciplinary care, and training programs for nurses who had been pushed out or overlooked. And at the top of every section, her name was penciled in, not as a suggestion, but as the beginning of the plan. She was used to reading proposals that never involved people like her, used to being part of a system that asked for her time and sacrifice, but rarely her ideas. Now someone was asking for both, and still the thought of accepting such an offer terrified her. She took Lily to school as usual, the rhythm of their routine grounding her. As she walked back to the apartment, the image of those 10 cars lined up outside her home returned vividly. The stares, the whispers, the questions. She had avoided social media since that day, unsure of what might be circulating online. Whatever the world had made of the spectacle, she wanted no part in it. She hadn't yet decided what she wanted at all. The apartment felt too small for her thoughts. She opened the windows to let in fresh air, hoping it would clear the mental weight she was carrying. That was when she heard the familiar sound again, engines low and steady approaching from a distance. Her stomach tightened. She stepped onto the balcony, half expecting another line of black cars, but it was just one this time, sleek, silent, and parked neatly in front of her building. Victoria stepped out, carrying a small parcel in one hand, and looked up toward the second floor where Emily stood. She raised her hand in a calm, deliberate gesture. No pressure, no words, just presence. Emily went downstairs and opened the door before Victoria even knocked. "Good morning," the assistant said with a warm expression. "Ellington asked me to deliver something." "I won't take much of your time." Mr. Shi handed Emily the box, medium-sized, wrapped in plain navy paper, unmarked. Emily took it cautiously. "What is it?" Victoria smiled gently. "Something he hopes will help you decide." There was no further explanation, no scripted pitch, just another nod, and then she returned to the car and drove away, leaving Emily standing in the doorway, unsure if she should feel grateful or apprehensive. She carried the box inside, sat at the table and opened it slowly. Inside was a simple wooden case. No label, no branding. When she unlatched it, the contents made her freeze. Inside, laid carefully in dark velvet lining, were 10 keys. Each belonged to one of the vehicles that had parked outside her home 2 days earlier. Each key came with a small folded card attached by ribbon. She picked up the first one and opened the card. It didn't list specifications or resale value. It posed a question. If you could go anywhere, where would you go first? She opened the second. What would you build if money wasn't your limitation? Third, which risk have you avoided, and why? Each of the 10 cards was like this, not promises, not offers, just provocations, gently challenging her to imagine again, to dream in ways she had stopped allowing herself to. None of the cards mentioned the cars directly, but each one offered a scenario that could only be addressed if the fear of lack was removed. She reached the final key and its note. What would you do if you believed your instincts had never been wrong? Emily sat back, stunned by the quiet power of the gesture. She had expected opulence, maybe even something performative. But this wasn't about showmanship. This was about intention. The vehicles, each of them a symbol of choice, were not trophies. They were tools, options, exit routes, or beginnings. Still, it was absurd, wasn't it? 10 luxury vehicles for a single act of CPR. The scale didn't match the moment. But that was her logic speaking, the voice trained by years of navigating systems where value was always transactional and tightly measured. James was operating outside that world. He was trying to redefine the terms entirely. The rest of the day passed in quiet reflection. She left the box of keys open on the table, not as temptation but as an anchor to the new reality she had not yet accepted. She made dinner, helped Lily with homework, and read bedtime stories, all while her mind kept circling the same unspoken thought. What if this wasn't the anomaly? What if this was who she had always been? Only now the world was finally responding accordingly. Around 10 o'clock that night, as the apartment settled into stillness and the weight of the day pressed down gently instead of harshly, she made a decision. She wouldn't sell the cars, not yet. She wouldn't reject the offer either. She needed time, but more than that, she needed to act on something that had nothing to do with survival or responsibility. She needed to choose for herself for once. She wrote a short note on a plain piece of paper and placed it inside the wooden case with the keys. "I'm not sure where this road leads, but I'm not afraid to walk it anymore." Then she closed the lid. She didn't sleep immediately, but when she did, it came with a calm she hadn't felt in years, not because life was finally fair, but because, for the first time, it felt hers again. By the next morning, the neighborhood had changed, not in its layout or the people who lived there, but in how it looked at her. Emily noticed it the moment she stepped outside with Lily to wait for the school bus. The air carried a new kind of quiet, one that wasn't rooted in calm but in observation. A few neighbors who used to wave now paused, glanced, and offered stiff, uncertain nods. Some crossed the street without making eye contact. Others hovered nearby, watching as if she might suddenly sprout wings and fly away in one of the luxury cars that still occupied the parking lot downstairs. She hadn't moved the vehicles yet. She hadn't touched them. They sat parked, aligned like silent witnesses to her new reality. 10 symbols of wealth and status in a community where most people worked double shifts just to keep their homes. She had asked James for time, and he had granted it without question. But time didn't stop the stares, it didn't quiet the whispers. That afternoon, when she returned from the grocery store, she found a folded flyer on her doorstep. At first glance, it looked like a coupon or a local ad. But when she opened it, the message was handwritten in large block letters. "People like you don't belong here anymore." No signature, no clue who had written it. But the intent was clear. This wasn't just jealousy, it was resentment, fear, the idea that she had been one of them and now was something else entirely. She held the note for several minutes before tearing it in half and dropping it into the trash, but it didn't leave her. Not really. It lingered in the back of her mind, whispering doubt into moments that should have felt like progress. Later that day, a local reporter knocked on her door. "Miss Carter, I'm with Channel 4, the woman said. "We'd love to do a short segment on what happened last week. We think your story could really inspire people. Would you be willing to share a few words?" Emily stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to say. She wasn't a public figure. She hadn't asked for attention. She had acted on instinct, not ambition. "I appreciate the interest," she replied finally, "but I'm not ready to talk." The reporter tried to press, asked about the cars, about the billionaire, about whether the rumors were true. Emily gently but firmly closed the door. The woman left a business card wedged into the doorframe. Emily threw it away without reading the name. By evening, the pressure of it all felt like a second skin. She paced the apartment, unable to sit, unable to focus. Lily, perceptive despite her age, finally asked what was wrong. "Are we moving?" the girl asked. "Why would you think that?" Emily replied, kneeling beside her. "Because people are acting like we don't live here anymore." The words hit harder than she expected. Not cruel, not dramatic, just observant. Children saw what adults tried to hide behind glances and polite silence. Emily hugged her tightly. "We live where we want to live, and right now, this is our home." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure if it was true. The offer James had made wasn't just about a job or cars. It was about a door opening into a different world, one with opportunity, respect, and possibility. But crossing through that door would mean leaving behind everything familiar. It would mean accepting a reality that few around her could understand or forgive. She returned to the folder he'd given her and reread the documents. Each page described a vision of medical care rooted in compassion, skill, and dignity. The emergency unit wasn't meant to replace what existed. It was meant to fill a gap the system had long ignored. But it would come with scrutiny, with pressure, with responsibility she had never held before. She asked herself over and over whether she was ready. That night, she received a call from someone she hadn't spoken to in years, an old nursing school classmate named Carla, now working at a hospital in Florida. They had drifted apart over time, as people do, but somehow Carla had heard about the cars, about the incident, about the man Emily had saved. "I saw your name in a blog post," Carla said. "Are you really working with Ellington?" "They didn't mention much, but I knew it was you." Emily hesitated. "Not yet. He made an offer. I'm still thinking." There was a pause on the line. "You should take it," Carla said finally. "If he's serious, and it sounds like he is, you won't get another chance like this. We've all dreamed of something like that. Not the money, the freedom to actually help. Without red tape, without being treated like a number." Emily closed her eyes. It felt good to hear someone understand. Someone outside the narrow lens of her neighborhood, her building, her immediate circle. Someone who didn't see the cars, but the choice. After the call ended, she sat by the window, staring at the quiet street below. One of the cars reflected the glow of the street lamp, its polished surface undisturbed. She thought about what it represented. Not status, but transformation. She wasn't chasing wealth. She wasn't running from her roots. She was standing on a threshold. And the wait wasn't just about deciding whether to cross it. It was about who she would be on the other side. 2 days passed and the world didn't stop watching. Emily tried to keep her head down, to avoid the eyes that now lingered too long when she went out to buy groceries or walk Lily to school. Every step outside felt like an intrusion, every casual glance like a question she didn't want to answer. It wasn't fame, not in the traditional sense. It was the kind of silent attention that follows people when they cross an invisible line. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She had become a symbol in a story everyone thought they understood, but no one had truly heard. By the third morning, she found another envelope at her door. There was no knock, no engine humming at the curb. Just silence and the pale paper resting at her feet. Inside was a single line. "Come see what we could build together." No name, no address, only a set of GPS coordinates handwritten beneath the message. She hesitated only a moment before texting Victoria. "I assume this is from him," she wrote. The reply came seconds later. "Yes, we'll send a car in 30 minutes. Just you, if possible." Emily didn't tell Lily where she was going, only that she had a meeting. Her neighbor agreed to watch her for the afternoon. She dressed simply, clean jeans, a white blouse, the same comfortable shoes she always wore to long shifts at the hospital. Nothing about her had changed outwardly, but as she rode in silence through the edges of Nashville, away from the city's familiar contours, she felt the ground shifting beneath her again. The destination was nothing like she expected. It was an unfinished building, hidden behind a grove of old oak trees just off a rural highway. The structure was surrounded by scaffolding and cranes, but the foundation was complete, and its shape was already emerging. It wasn't a skyscraper. It wasn't designed to impress with height or shine. It was long, sprawling, made of stone and steel, with large windows and a wide entryway. The sign at the front was temporary, printed in black ink and clipped to a Post Ellington Community Emergency Care Facility, Phase 1, Victoria. Met her at the entrance wearing work boots and a construction vest, her usual sleek attire replaced by something more practical. She smiled but said little, leading Emily through the skeleton of what would soon be something real. Inside, the rooms had already taken form, wide hallways, bright spaces designed to hold light, not just function. High ceilings, soundproofing. In the walls, rooms prepared for crisis but built for dignity. No overburdened corridors, no shared recovery rooms, privacy and presence, not pressure. Emily walked slowly, absorbing the structure like it was a story being told in architecture. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but it was intentional. James was waiting at the far end of the main hall, hands in his pockets, wearing a black jacket and grey slacks covered lightly with dust. He looked less like a billionaire than he ever had, and more like someone invested in every brick being laid. "You came?" he said simply. "I wasn't sure I would," she replied. "I wasn't sure you should," he said, a smile touching the corner of his mouth. They stood in the center of the unfinished space, the smell of concrete and sawdust all around them. It was cold inside, but Emily didn't feel it. Her eyes kept moving from wall to wall, trying to piece together the scale of what she was looking at. "This isn't a gift," he said after a moment. "It's an invitation." She turned to him, waiting. "I've seen how systems fail. People," he continued, "how bureaucracy buries compassion. I've built things for years, software, networks, corporate shells, but I've never built anything with a heartbeat. This facility is meant to change how emergency care works. It's small for now, but it won't be for long. We're starting here because it's where I almost died. But the reach is going to grow." Emily said nothing. Her thoughts were moving too fast. "I want you to lead the emergency care division," James said, repeating the proposal he'd first made days earlier. "Not just run it. Build it. With me? From policy to practice, you decide how it works, who it serves, how we treat people who walk through those doors. You've lived the system from inside. Now I want you to help remake it from outside." "It's more than I've ever done," she said. "It's exactly what you've always done," he corrected, "just on a bigger stage." She looked down at the concrete floor, then back up at the walls rising around her. They were rough still, unfinished, but they were real. She imagined them filled with nurses who weren't burnt out, with doctors who weren't drowning in quotas. She imagined patients who weren't waiting 8 hours in pain. She imagined her own name on a door, not as a reward, but as a sign that people like her belonged in rooms where decisions were made. "Why me?" she asked again, needing to hear it one more time. "Because you didn't wait," he said. "You moved when others froze. You helped because it was right, not because it was safe. That's leadership." Emily walked through the corridor again, slower this time. She paused at what would become a triage bay, then at a row of private consultation rooms, then at the quiet space designed for families to sit when they couldn't do anything else but wait. Everything here had been thought through. It wasn't rushed. It was grounded in empathy. When she returned to him, James didn't speak. He simply handed her a new folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No contracts, no legal bindings. Just a question. "Do you want to help us build something better?" At the bottom, a blank line for a name. She didn't sign it that moment, but she held onto the folder as they walked back out into the late afternoon sun. The wind moved gently through the trees, and the cranes above the roof swayed slightly in rhythm with the breeze. She stood at the edge of the site and looked back one more time. It still wasn't real, but it could be. And maybe that was enough to say yes. The days that followed felt like a slow, deliberate awakening. Emily didn't sign the offer immediately, but something inside her had already shifted. The decision lived in her bones now, quiet but undeniable. After weeks of silence, of doubts wrapped in noise, she finally heard her own voice again. And it was clear. The first thing she did was call Carla, the old friend who had encouraged her to take the offer. She didn't ask for advice this time. She simply told her the truth. "I'm going to do it," Emily said. "Not for the title, not even for the opportunity, but because I can't let someone else decide what healthcare should look like anymore." Carla laughed softly on the other end of the line. "That's the most Emily thing I've ever heard." She returned the signed folder to Victoria the next morning. No entourage, no ceremony, just a quiet exchange in the lobby of a hotel that Ellington's team was using as a temporary operations hub. There were no handshakes or photos, just a mutual understanding that the work had now begun. By the end of the day, Emily received a secure login and access to the internal planning systems for the new facility. Floor plans, staff projections, equipment budgets, training schedules. Everything was at her fingertips, and she didn't hesitate. She worked late into the night that evening, and every night after. Lily would fall asleep with her favorite book beside her, while Emily sat at the kitchen table, sketching out workflows, rewriting protocols, building training modules. She didn't have to ask permission anymore. She didn't have to submit proposals for approval that would be ignored. For the first time, her experience wasn't being filtered through layers of executive detachment. The first major decision she made was to implement a rotational peer support program for the ER staff. No more lone shifts with no backup. Every nurse would have a co-lead. They would rotate weekly, with mental health check-ins built into the schedule. She knew how quickly burnout could set in. She knew the toll silence could take on someone who spent 12 hours straight absorbing the pain of others. James approved it without hesitation. 2 weeks later, she presented a draft hiring protocol. She wanted to recruit from overlooked pools, nurses who had taken time off to care for family, professionals who had left hospital systems due to political or discriminatory treatment, international nurses with strong credentials but no stateside placements. Her plan included mentorship, credentialing partnerships, and community-led vetting processes, again approved. Then came the interviews. Emily sat across from nurses with lined faces and tired eyes, people who had been dismissed, devalued, but still carried the fire to care. One woman, once the head trauma nurse at a major metropolitan hospital, broke down halfway through the interview and said, "No one's ever asked me what I need to keep going." Emily offered her a job on the spot. News of her role spread slowly but steadily. At first it was whispers in professional circles, then blogs, then local radio shows. Articles began to appear, not about the luxury cars, but about what she was building. Former colleagues reached out, some to reconnect, others to ask how they could join. And though there were still those who whispered behind her back, who saw her story only through the lens of luck or charity, the narrative was changing. She was no longer the nurse who got lucky by saving a billionaire. She was becoming the woman rebuilding a model of care. James remained present, but distant enough to let her lead. When they spoke, it was always about progress. He asked questions. That mattered. And when he didn't know something, he admitted it without shame. He treated her as a partner, not a subordinate. And though his name carried weight in the meetings, it was Emily's decisions shaping the future of the project. One afternoon, after a particularly long planning session, she walked alone through the nearly finished hallways of the facility. The scent of fresh paint lingered in the air, and sunlight cut through the wide windows, casting warm patterns on the tiled floors. She paused in the central atrium, which would soon serve as both a waiting area and a place for staff and patients to breathe without pressure. She stood there, hands in her pockets, listening to the quiet hum of construction in the background. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember the day she was let go, the weight of that loss, the fear of not being enough. She thought of the letter left on her doorstep, of the stares, the threats, the doubt, and then she thought of this space, open, intentional hers. She didn't need recognition, she didn't need headlines. All she wanted was for people to walk into this building and feel something different from the cold panic of most ERs. She wanted them to feel seen, safe, human. The facility was scheduled to open in 3 months. As the weeks passed, the transformation of the space mirrored her own. The structure gained definition. The staff began on-site training, supplies arrived, desks were filled, systems tested, community partners visited, local clinics offered support. Word spread that something real was coming, and with it the sense that maybe care didn't have to feel like survival. One night, long after everyone had gone home, she sat alone in her new office, a space still bare but already meaningful. She looked at her reflection in the window and saw someone she hadn't recognized in months, stronger, wiser, not unscarred, but whole. The comeback wasn't just about work. It was about reclaiming the version of herself that had been buried under expectation, doubt, and exhaustion. It was about building something that could outlast the noise, something honest. And she wasn't done yet. By the time the facility opened, the world had changed. Not because of headlines or declarations, but because something tangible had emerged from intention. The Ellington Community Emergency Care Facility stood fully formed, where once there had been only ideas and unfinished walls. It opened without fireworks, without press conferences or ribbon-cutting ceremonies. There were no speeches broadcasted, no red carpets, no honorary guests flown in. It began the way Emily had always envisioned healthcare should, quietly, intentionally, and with the doors open wide. The first patients walked in on a rainy Monday morning, a mother with a child who had fallen off a bike, an elderly man who had ignored chest pains for 3 days, a young woman in tears, saying only that she had nowhere else to go. There were no long lines, no cold stares, no sterile chairs lined up like a factory waiting room. Instead, there was a team already moving in concert, greeting them by name, treating them with calm, precise care. Emily was there, walking the halls, not in an office, but alongside the nurses. She knew their names, their stories, their reasons for returning to a system they once thought had no place for them. She spent her days rotating between triage, observation, consultation meetings, and late-night debriefs. Her desk remained uncluttered, her office often empty, because she refused to lead from behind closed doors. When someone asked where the chief was, they usually found her at a bedside. Within the first month, the facility had treated over 700 patients. Not one of them left with a complaint about neglect or delay. That wasn't a coincidence. It was the result of years of buried knowledge finally given room to move. The structure worked because the people inside it were allowed to work the way they knew they should. No more hourly targets, no more empty policy language, no more performance reviews disconnected from reality. Just care. Clear, human, deliberate care. James visited often, but always respectfully. He watched from the periphery, spoke to staff only when invited, and asked questions more than he gave answers. He wasn't the center of attention. That role belonged to those who had earned it. Once, after observing a trauma intake handled, in under 6 minutes from door to stabilization, he turned to Emily and said, "You've done something most leaders only talk about." She responded without ceremony, "Worked. We're just doing what works." What always should have words spread again, this time not as gossip or spectacle, but as proof. Articles began to circulate in professional medical journals, not flashy. Pieces filled with buzzwords, real data, case studies, testimonials. Facilities from other states sent representatives. Calls came from former administrators, once her superiors, now seeking her insight. Her name started appearing in conferences not as a case study of success, but as an authority on what medicine had forgotten. She declined most invitations. She preferred to stay where the work was happening. But she agreed to one, a regional symposium on community healthcare innovation, where she was asked to speak about the facility's design and philosophy. Standing at the podium in front of hundreds of practitioners, policymakers, and skeptics, she didn't use slides. She didn't open with numbers. She told a story about the sidewalk, about the moment of decision, about a man she didn't know, who changed her life by nearly losing his. She ended by saying, "I wasn't trying to save a billionaire, I was trying to save a life. What I didn't realize was that I was also saving the part of myself that believed healthcare still had a heart." The applause came slowly, then all at once. After that, she became a name others began to reference, not as a miracle case, but as a model. Emily Carter, the nurse who redesigned what emergency care could be. Not by reinventing the science, but by restoring its soul. The ripple extended further than she imagined. Smaller clinics began adapting her peer support models. Community. Health centers incorporated her patient flow systems. Her internal wellness protocols were requested by 3 teaching hospitals. Nursing programs began citing her work as case studies for leadership training. But the most important effect wasn't in published reports or university syllabi. It was in the people who walked into her facility and walked out changed. One morning, a boy arrived with severe asthma, barely breathing. His mother carried him in, panicked, believing she'd be ignored like at the last hospital. He was seen within 60 seconds, stabilized within 15. He left that evening with treatment, a clear plan, and a follow-up check-in already scheduled. A week later, that mother came back, not with her son, but with flowers. She wasn't there to file a complaint or to ask for more. She simply said, "You made me feel like my son mattered. No one's ever done that before." Emily kept those flowers in a vase near the entrance, not because they were beautiful, but because they were real. A reminder of why the facility had been built, not to impress, but to listen. Internally, her staff began calling her the Pulse, not because she was everywhere at once, but because she kept the rhythm of the place steady. She checked in with new hires. She met weekly with janitorial staff and supply vendors. She made it clear that every role, from receptionist to surgeon, was vital. Turnover dropped to nearly zero. Burnout rates plummeted, and satisfaction among staff and patients rose beyond expectations. One night, while finishing paperwork alone, she found an envelope left on her desk. Inside was a handwritten note from James. "You didn't just save a life, you taught me what mine could mean. I hope this place continues to teach others the same." There was no signature, just the letter J. She folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer beside the very first note, the one that had once frightened her. Now it served as a marker of how far she had come. The facility wasn't perfect, no system ever was, but it was working, and more importantly, it was healing, both those who entered it and those who ran it. Emily stood by the entrance the next morning, greeting patients as they arrived, one by one, name by name. She wasn't just the woman who had accepted an offer, she had become the reason that offer meant anything at all. Autumn came slowly that year. The leaves along the highway leading to the facility turned golden in slow motion, like they were reluctant to let go. Mornings grew crisper, the air more fragile. The Ellington Community Emergency Care Facility remained steady amid the change, its walls now softened by routine and familiarity. What had once been a bold experiment had settled into something real, something rooted. There were still days of chaos, of back-to-back trauma responses and emotional exhaustion, but there was also laughter in the break room, music from portable speakers during shift changes, and handwritten thank you notes pinned to the staff board. Emily's life had taken on a rhythm she had never imagined. She no longer woke up afraid of the next bill, the next rejection, the next invisible hand pulling the rug from under her. She woke up focused, intentional, grounded. Her days were full, her nights no longer haunted by what-ifs. Lily thrived in her new school, made friends easily, and started asking questions about medicine. Emily watched her daughter grow and wondered what kind of world she might one day inherit. A world maybe just a little better because of one impulsive decision on a Nashville sidewalk. Then one day a courier arrived with a letter. There was no return address. The envelope was thick, the paper of an unusual weight. Inside was a single handwritten note, different from the precise block letters of the early messages, but unmistakably personal. "Emily, I've spent most of my life hiding behind systems. Business, money, reputation. They insulated me from the world. I believed I could change things from the top, until the day I almost lost everything at the bottom. You reached for me without knowing who I was, without asking for anything. I thought saving my life would be the end of our story. I didn't realize it would be the beginning of yours. I've made a decision, and it's the last one I'll make alone. As of this week, 20% of my personal wealth has been transferred into a permanent endowment. The interest from this fund will be used exclusively for public health initiatives, free clinics, mental health access, community emergency training, and crisis response education. I've asked that your name guide the grant criteria, not because you need the recognition, but because your name now stands for what we forgot matters: care without condition. This is not about philanthropy. It's about course correction. You saved me, and through you I've seen how many more lives can be touched. There are no thanks strong enough, but I hope this is a start." Emily read the letter twice, then a third time. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded it and placed it beside the others in her drawer. She sat at her desk for several minutes, without moving, the silence not heavy, but filled with something too large to name. Then she stood, walked to the front of the building, and stepped outside. The sun was rising over the tree line, casting long golden lines across the parking lot and the surrounding grass. The facility glowed in the morning light, not just as a building, but as proof that one life can touch many, that impact isn't always loud, and that sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin with a quiet act of instinct. She looked out, across the horizon, then turned back inside to begin her day. There was no celebration, no announcement, no speeches, but the world shifted anyway, because a woman who had once lost everything chose not to retreat, but to act. And in doing so, she changed the meaning of what one life can do.